Welcome back to another episode of the Diabetes Digital Podcast. It's the new year, and of course, we wanted to do a New Year's episode talking all about setting sustainable goals for 2025. We know that it's very common for people to want to start new diets and cleanses and challenges. They're super popular in the new year, but sometimes it's really important just to pause and think about what you're actually going to be able to sustain long term. Today, we're super excited to welcome the two incredible co-hosts from the podcast Food We Need to Talk, Juna Gjata and Dr. Eddie Phillips. They tackle everything from fitness myths to eating psychology, and so they're the perfect guests for this episode.
Welcome to the Diabetes Digital Podcast. I'm Wendy.
And I'm Jess, and we're best friends, registered dietitians, and diabetes educators.
Through our telehealth platform, diabetesdigital.co, we offer accessible and personalized virtual nutrition counseling for people with diabetes and prediabetes.
Visit diabetesdigital.co, that's C-O, to book your first appointment. We accept insurance and offer affordable self-pay options. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Welcome to the podcast, Juna and Eddie.
Thank you for
having us. I will tell everybody that we were on your podcast. We had so much fun.
Yes.
That episode came out in November, so we'll definitely make sure to link it in the show notes. And we just love your guys' energy and your podcast chemistry because that is a thing.
Thank you. Yes, likewise.
Thank you.
Yeah, and today it's New Year's, and I know that a lot of people are getting a lot of New Year, New You messaging. So we wanted to have you both on just to talk about New Year's resolutions, maybe some of your favorite habits that people can try to get into, some tips for creating sustainable goals and things like that. So how does that sound?
Perfect.
So fun.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, so to kick off today's episode, can you both share one of the wildest New Year's resolutions that you've ever heard of?
Yes. Oh, heard of or done ourselves?
It could be either or.
It could be both. It could be both. Juna, knowing you, it's probably the same.
I know. The same thing. So I'll go ahead and share. So I love New Year's resolutions. I am a very, very avid resolver, if that's a word. And one of the craziest ones I feel like I made was to lose 30 pounds by graduation, which was in May. So it was like lose 30 pounds in 5 months. This is before we had the podcast. And obviously a big inspiration for our podcast, Food We Need to Talk, was all the crazy things that I did to lose weight before the podcast started. And so this year, because I was graduating from college, I was really, really serious about wanting to look really good on graduation. So when I was home for Christmas break, I did all this research on exercise, like what lifting routines people were doing, whatever. And the day I got back to school, I had like 3 gigantic boxes from Amazon waiting for me with pre-workouts, protein powders, amino acids, just like the craziest things, gym clothes. And I went to the gym every day and ran every day for months. And then, of course, crashed and burned like 2 months in because it was so unsustainable. But that was my crazy goal.
What about you, Dr. Phillips?
You could call me Eddie, otherwise I think I have to be responsible for your health. So.
Although you don't want him in charge of your health.
Big responsibility.
He's a great doctor.
I'll tell you one that sticks in my mind, which I think I was in front of an audience in, let's say, late February, and we were talking about New Year's resolutions, and the question I raised to the audience was, can anyone say and report that they have stuck to their resolution since January? And everyone looked around sheepishly like, oh, I've crashed and burned, and that was a stupid resolution, and I can't believe I didn't, fill in the blank. And one guy puts up his hand and he goes, I have. And I go, well, what was your resolution? And he said, this year I resolved not to make any resolutions.
Oh.
And I looked at him, I said, well, technically you failed as soon as you made that resolution, but we understand your point. And he, sort of shared that resolutions hadn't worked for him in the past. And he was going to be sort of a lot calmer and, maybe take one day at a time rather than say the year is kaput by February because he's failed.
I like that approach. I'm with the guy in the audience because we've seen that so many times where January rolls around. I think it's also like a lot of the post holiday guilt that people have from the social gatherings and maybe overeating or eating in a way that they're not typically accustomed to. And then
Mm-hmm.
just wanting to like overhaul by the time that January comes in. But
Totally.
like the guy said, what we have found is that, a couple months down the line, maybe even a few weeks down the line, depending on how extreme the resolution is, it's typically not very sustainable. And that's why we thought it would be a good time to do this episode, because so many people are trying to overhaul in January. And something that I hear a lot about too is like, well, the summer is going to be here before you know it. And just
Yes.
like things tied to aesthetics and having a summer body, whatever that means. So this episode is very timely. And yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you both just about creating goals that are going to last the whole year and beyond versus just like this prime season for making resolutions.
I'll just add one thing that in the health club industry, this is called like tourist season.
Mm.
Because, in January, it's really hard to get the spinning bike that you're used to sitting on week in, week out through the entire year. And there's no place for my yoga mat because there's a tourist there. And, the parking lot is filled. And I've learned how to be more mindful. I just take a deep breath and figure February will be here soon.
Exactly.
The tourists will be gone and I can just continue, as I did before.
Yeah, it's definitely January. It's very interesting. And I think I try not to have people feel bad about their resolutions, right? Because we've all been there and, new year, it's a fresh start. And I think people can feel really ambitious. And sometimes that ambition can lead to unrealistic expectations, right? I think there's also a lot of like all or nothing that happens with resolutions in the new year. It's like, how you were saying, okay, I'm going to work out every single day and do the powders and the potions. And like that just gets old and not sustainable for most people. So I'm curious, Eddie, as a physician, what is your approach when you're helping your patients set goals that actually stick? Like, how do you balance motivation with practicality?
So I would step back a little bit and say, like, long before you make your resolution and you set your goals, I'm going to ask you some basic questions like, are we even talking about this? What's your ultimate goal? What's your purpose? And this is pretty grand. Like, what's your purpose on the planet? Turns out, actually, the people that can describe their purpose and live with it live longer. I mean, how cool is that? So I guess all those unpurposeful people, they die earlier.
What are you saying about them? I'm saying.
So, like, why would you actually want to make a change if it is to get as you mentioned, a beach body, or you want to get accolades on Instagram? Does one get accolades on Instagram? You have to translate for me. You want
No, but you can hit milestones. I don't know.
that's probably not going to be enough to sustain you. So I go way back to, like, why would you actually want to make this change? Who is it going to help besides you? And if it's for your family, great. If it's because you're serving humanity, you want to be a good doctor, you want to influence people, then it's probably worth whatever might be perceived as a sacrifice. So that's one way of looking at it. The other one that you asked about is the all or nothing is just, oh my God, like failure is failure and all the good gets washed away. I'll just share like one anecdote that I love telling to that. So years ago, I heard this thing was called the Nature Challenge. Have you ever heard of this? It's real simple. 30 minutes a day for 30 days, like a whole month, you're outside. Driving doesn't count. You have to be sort of like out in nature. And if you live in an urban area, go find a tree and hug that. You got to be like outside. Look at the stars. Just breathe the air outside. So I started doing that. How hard could this be? January 1st, real simple, day off. January 2nd, I, figured it out. 3rd and 4th, well, that was the weekend. And by January 5th, I had failed. And it was like, what a freaking loser. I can't be outside for half an hour. And it was like utter failure. And then with a little bit of coaching, I sort of thought about this and I thought, I had no database. Like meaning like, how often am I outside? So February, I just recorded how many days. I was like, oh, actually, I'm good for 18 days out of, not bad. And then March, I went at it as like, I wonder if I can increase the number of days that I'm outside.
Mm.
That was the question. So it's no longer an all or nothing. It's just sort of, can I move towards this goal?
Yeah. I think that's great. Like starting with what your baseline is, like monitoring your baseline. And then from there, doing small increments. That's brilliant.
And you get to declare success. Because if I did 19 days in March, now it's also a little bit longer, so I'm gonna, it's a longer month. Then,
Yeah.
I'm going to call success, and if I choose in April, I can, do even better.
Yeah. That's great. I love getting personal recommendations from our guests on kind of what they're doing to improve their health. So I'm curious, and we can start with you. What is one small habit that you are currently doing that you could recommend to somebody else who is just looking for ideas and things they could start with the new year? And then we'll go to Eddie after that.
I think something that's made a big difference in my life is implementing habit stacking. So, habit stacking was made super famous. I think it was by the guy who wrote Atomic Habits. And it was basically about attaching a habit that you want to do to one that you already do. And because I always have so many New Year's resolutions, it's always hard for me at the end of the year to actually have done them. So, I thought this one might be the easiest way for me to actually make sure that I do them. So, for example, one thing that I really wanted to do was stretch. And I always put off stretching because I find it like quite boring compared to all the other things I do. So I never do it. And so attaching it to a habit that I was already doing was something that I really helped me actually do it consistently this year. So for mine, it was brushing my teeth. So I decided after I brush my teeth every day, I'm going to stretch no matter what, because I know I'll never miss brushing my teeth. And so then it just became like a nightly thing. And it was really annoying at first because at the end of the day, you're really stiff. So I feel like I was never as flexible. So I was like, it doesn't even matter for me to do it at this time. I'm not flexible anymore. But over time, my body did adjust and I started to become more flexible towards the end of the day because my body just started getting used to stretching at that time. So for
Wow.
me, it's about connecting a habit you already are doing to one that you want to do. So if it's like drink more water, then it's like every time I drink coffee, I'm going to also drink a glass of water. Or every time I go into my room, I'm going to drink from my water bottle. Something like that. And I think that really helps you to actually stick to what you're trying to do.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So for the stretching, how did you get started? Did you just do like 5 minutes? Did you have some kind of program you followed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I'm a very all or nothing person, which is like exactly the opposite of how you should be in the New Year's resolutions. So I think a big barrier for me from getting into stretching before was that when I was consistently stretching, it was like a 20-minute ordeal because I was stretching everything and I really wanted to get my splits. So I was very intense about it for like 6 months. And then, of course, I never did it again. So I wanted to make it really low stakes for myself. And so the muscles I really, really wanted to stretch were my hip flexors and hamstrings because, like I said, I did want to get my splits. And so it was basically just, according to the scientific literature, stretching for at least 30 seconds, like a static stretch, is what actually gets your central nervous system to relax your muscles in that area. So basically, I just did 30 seconds on each side at least for my hamstrings, hip flexors, and glutes. And so that's like a basically 3-minute routine, not including transition time. So it's like 5 minutes.
Wow.
So starting off really small really helped me. And then if I felt, like, okay, like, yeah, I can do a little more, then I could stretch other parts too. But that was for me, the minimum was like these basically 3 stretches, hamstring, glutes, and hip flexors, because they were the most important to me. And it made it very doable because it was a short amount of time.
Oh my gosh, you're motivating me.
Yeah.
Okay, Eddie, on to you. What's one small habit that you do that you would recommend?
So I actually spent so much time thinking about this, and you and I spent a lot of time with our podcast, that I'm going to move beyond kind of like the simple health goals, because I've experimented with, like, can I drink a little more water and go to bed a few minutes earlier? And so one of them that comes from one of our guests is I'm going to, or have been and going to, spend more time in awe, actually, like looking up at the heavens and kind of taking a breath and say, like, oh my God, and walking into the forest and kind of like entering the forest and sort of feeling what there is to be felt, and understand that there's a lot more out there than is just our, what we're concerned about